yesterday morning, we saw the news break that Tom Thibodeau has agreed to a new contract extension to remain with the New York Knicks through the 2027-28 season. Tibbs took over a few years ago. His first season was in 2020-21, and it has largely been a big success where there was winning seasons in 3 out of 4 years, and coming for a Knicks franchise that was really struggling for a lot of the 21st century they were always in conversations about who they could be getting and what types of moves they could make to make a splash and put together some type of a playoff run, but that just had not been the case, and Thibodeau has sort of reoriented that by rejuvenating the organization, getting the most out of the pieces that are currently in place, and the Knicks are absolutely on a rise as of these latest years. So Thibodeau, who is now 175 and 143 with the Knicks, he is 5th in franchise history for wins, the 2-time coach of the year that is closing in on 1,000 career wins as a head coach. He is very likely going to hit that mark by the time that this contract expires. He's currently at 916. So if you look at last season where he won 50 games, it was 47 games the year prior. Continuing on that type of trajectory would get it done for him. So you definitely have to feel good for Tibbs to some degree. I know that there are definitely people out there who have their share of complaints about Tibbs maybe overplaying some of his stars, and I do feel like that criticism is warranted to some degree. Now, at the same time, when we're talking about the playoffs, you obviously understand that it's kind of leaving it all out there on the floor, but it still has done some damage to a number of star players that he's had on his rosters over the course of the years. But besides all of that, Thibodeau is somebody who has been extremely committed to winning. He's always been a culture setter, and that's what the Knicks were really in need of at the time where they brought him in. And luckily, they were able to pair him up with some other crucial stars at that time. Mostly Jalen Brunson, who they signed a couple years ago. They just signed him to a new contract extension this past year, and it has been a very impressive run for a couple years now, where they've made the conference semifinals in 2 of the past 3 seasons. Knicks fans, and I think it's warranted, would tell you that they should have made the conference finals this year if they were fully healthy. Again, I do agree with that sentiment, but the Knicks weren't just satisfied with that. Like I mentioned, they have Jalen Brunson, who they just re-signed to a contract at the trade deadline last year. They made a move for OG Anunoby. They bring him back on an expensive deal. They're bringing Tibbs back, so they are choosing to stick with this core that was able to win them 50 games last year and have them as the 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. But they're going above and beyond as well, where they made the move for Mikal Bridges earlier this offseason as well. And when that trade breaks, you see all of the draft picks that are attached to the deal, and it feels like a lot. And to this point, I can't tell you definitively that there's no chance that this does end up hurting them, but ultimately, you see the first round picks that they dealt out, and it sort of masks the fact that they gave up pretty much nothing in terms of actual talent that is going to get rotation minutes in these next few years where they feel like they have a window they need to capitalize on. The only real significant rotational piece that they moved was Bojan Bogdanovic, who was another one of their additions through the trade deadline this past year. And ultimately, the fit just didn't ever really seem to be there of Bogdanovic in a Tom Thibodeau system. So I'm sure he was fully willing to move on from Bogdanovic, and instead he gets Mikal Bridges, who is kind of the ultimate player for his system. Tibbs was probably licking his lips when he saw Mikal Bridges being just as available as he has been over the course of his career. I want to double check because I think when he was traded from the Suns to the Nets in 2022-23, yeah, he ended up playing 83 games that year. He gives all-out effort on both sides of the ball. He's a part of those Villanova Knicks of the core with Brunson and Hart and DiVincenzo, and now they bring in their running mate in Mikal Bridges, and the Knicks feel like they have a golden opportunity in front of them to compete over the course of these next few years, where last year we saw, again, the well-roundedness of this Knicks roster, top 10 in offensive and defensive efficiency last year. Now, they lose Isaiah Hartenstein in free agency, which I'm not going to say it's make or break. There's probably going to be at least a couple of different bigs that will be available at the trade deadline next season, so they could probably patch together some minutes there. Mitchell Robinson is an option for them if he is healthy. Now, that has unfortunately been a pretty big if over the course of the past couple of years, but a defensive monster Robinson is, so we will see what they're able to get out of him. Again, the rebounding has been one of the biggest advantages for the Knicks over the past couple years, and Hartenstein is a loss there, but they just did not have the money to be able to hold on to him, so they end up losing him. And the other kind of big difference from this team that was making a run, or at least seemed to be in the playoffs, is the fact that Julius Randle is going to return next year, and it's going to be very interesting to see how he fits in with this group of players who they probably, to some degree, not that Julius Randle is a bad teammate or anything, but there's going to likely be a little bit of a preferential treatment there where it's all of these college friends playing with one another, and Julius Randle is a little bit on the outside. But I still go back to that game that happened right before the All-Star break. It was when Jalen Brunson was announced as a first-time All-Star, and he ended up putting up, I think it was 50 points. And Julius Randle, you saw that there was just such genuine joy that he had for Brunson. So I don't think it's going to be a distraction. There was a little bit of a narrative from NBA fans in the community that the Knicks are better off without Julius Randle. Now that they have somebody like Mikal Bridges who can be a secondary creator, we saw in Brooklyn after he got traded to the Nets in that 22-23 season, when he was with the Nets, he was being a little bit more aggressive offensively, and we saw that he could potentially be a franchise cornerstone, averaging 26 points per game in 27 appearances, shooting 48% from the field. There was a lot of promise there, but ultimately it was never really going to be the case that he was the number one option on a championship team. And now that I feel like he has that experience as the primary option, it does maybe at least give the Knicks a little bit of... It gives him a little bit more experience to carry the workload when they need Jalen Brunson to take a little bit more of a breather. And Julius Randle, at the same time, is one of those players where he has been All-NBA. I want to say it's two-time All-NBA. In the past couple seasons, it would have been in 2021 and 2023. He's been All-NBA, so it's somebody that I don't necessarily love his play style. I feel like intensity can kind of waver at times, especially on the defensive side of the floor. He can take his fair share of heat checks, which, to be fair, we're talking about the NBA here. What star player doesn't? But I still think that Randle is going to be able to provide a number of different options, and who knows, for the Knicks, there's a chance that they could end up rolling out a little bit of a small ball lineup with Randle at the 5, and I know that is a very small team. Julius Randle is just 6'8", but you talk about putting those Knicks guys together, or those Villanova guys together, and having Julius Randle at the 5. Randle's a good rebounder. When he wants to be committed on defense, he can be. So again, just a lineup out there that I would be very curious to see if they get any runway this year. Again, ideally for Knicks fans, Mitchell Robinson is available for them, for the majority of the season, and they won't even necessarily have to worry about that quite as much. But again, just a different look out of this lineup that I definitely would be curious to see take the court with one another. But I think in this Eastern Conference, as things currently stand, it's the Boston Celtics who just re-signed everybody from last year. You can argue about the playoff path, but the Celtics were always the team to beat in the Eastern Conference, and I would say the NBA, but I still feel like maybe things play out differently if the Celtics have to face the Nuggets in the finals. But at least in the Eastern Conference, we knew for the entirety of the year that the Celtics were the team to go through. And ultimately, they didn't really face that level of competition last year. And it was because of some dysfunction with the other contenders that are at least perceived contenders going into the year. The Knicks dealing with all the injuries they were. You can say the same for the Bucks, but even with the Bucks, during the regular season, it was clear that something was off of what the expectations were. But I think that the Bucks are going to have a bounce back season. I would imagine that they win over 50 games this year, assuming Giannis and Dame are both healthy. I see that two-man game coming into fruition a little bit more this year. And then whatever you're going to get out of Philadelphia, maybe the Heat as well are able to, reemerge as a real threat in the playoffs this year. So I list all of these teams to say that there are teams that you can talk yourself into in the Eastern Conference. But for the most part, there are a lot of flaws with these contenders. And I feel like behind the Celtics, the Knicks are the most complete team in the Eastern Conference. Now, again, I still think that the ceiling for the Bucks is high, but you can say the same for the Knicks as well. And I think that they are going to have a really good chance, again, especially with all of the options that they have now and finally seeming like it was very much Brunson or bust for that offense last season. It seems like he is going to be able to delegate a little bit more. We might see Brunson's scoring stats dip a little bit, but that might even be for the betterment of the team as a whole. Because again, we saw when Brunson wasn't running the show, they had a number of really impressive supplementary players, but nobody that you necessarily felt great about taking over a game outside of Brunson. So that's an area where I definitely think they improved. And I feel like this Thibodeau extension was a little bit of a no-brainer. Again, when you take the overall context of what the Knicks have been battling with over the course of the past decade or so, Tom Thibodeau has been able to establish a winning culture, one that is very much needed for the Knicks because they're under such a spotlight being the brand that they are, and it felt like they were disappointing for such a long time, not to knock Carmelo Anthony or anything, but during those years, it always felt like, well, maybe if they got another star, or maybe if Melo could take his game to another level. Just nothing, it never really played out there. It was good for just one playoff series win, and that's not what we expect from the Knicks. It became what we expected over the course of, a decade, because that's what they were showing us, and probably even more so than just a decade there alone. But now it feels like the Knicks are in the heart of contention, and again, I think that this was a must-do deal for the Knicks, and they are going to be very much back in contention next season. But the Knicks aren't the only team that is championship hopeful in that state, where we have the New York Yankees, who were on, of course, one of the all-time heaters at the beginning of the year, and over the past couple days, they were clashing with the surging New York Mets in the Subway Series, and the results may not have been what we expected. Only the second time in the history of that rivalry the New York Mets were able to sweep. So we're going to break down how exactly that played out, what it means big term, and the trajectories that both of these teams are on coming out of this game and with the trade deadline right around the corner. So we will dive into all of that, but first a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.